right, we are live. So, hello, my name is Juno, and what's your name?
My name is Dan Loeb.
Awesome. Nice to meet with you today, Dan. Can we start off with maybe you talking about your comic book? You said that you just got one published, right?
Yes, Fructus seminalis. I don't know if you can see that well, but it's on my Gumroad. Yeah, this is my first book that I've published. I've got a few others in progress. The art is by Maxim Mel. Uh, it is a silent comic about a alien being. It's honestly, I know this is horrible, but one of the things I like to say is just the easiest way to understand what the book is just to check it out. It is available free. It's a lot faster than anything I could say, but it's a silent comic about the nature of an alien being. It's very different from life on Earth.
Awesome. And like I said in previous interviews, I just love things about aliens, so it's
Me
very
too.
exciting. So, what inspired you to become a comic book writer?
Well, I love stories. I'd say that's was more than I love comics or have a background in comics. Honestly, when I was a kid, I didn't like comic books very much at all. I liked Calvin and Hobbes, but it was the early '90s, which I think a lot of people fondly remember as the dark ages of of at least for the stuff my friends were into. They'd always like shove some like terrible X-Men comic, and I love X-Men now, but some X-Men comic. Oh, look how violent it is, and I'm like, yeah, I don't care. But I think over the last 20 years ago, I guess around 20, that's when I met a friend who was really into comics and started showing me cool stuff. Um, started by showing me some classic superhero stuff that wasn't terrible. I remember liking Superman, Red Sun a lot, and sort of building up to Watchmen. But when I started getting into things like Adventures in Bean World, and my favorite thing is Monsters and some Darcy Van Polgeest stuff, Little Bird. I started realizing what an incredible medium it is just for storytelling. I think I used to think of it as like uh, an easy way to try to do what you would do with a television show, but there's so many things that you can do with comics that aren't possible in television or other mediums. I just started trying to see stories that way. I guess it started with a friend inviting me to edit a comic he was writing, which never got published. But it was a lot of fun, and yeah, I just got totally hooked once I started trying to, you know, think in the language of a comic script. It was completely addictive. And then once I started hiring artists and seeing them breathe life into work, that's the most addictive thing I've ever come across in life. It's amazing. And I'm so happy with the job that Maxim did on this project. But the artists I'm working with now, it's every bit as exciting.
That's awesome. And when did you release this comic book, you said?
I'm sorry?
When did you release this comic book? Like the one
Oh,
that you
less than a month ago. They arrived. I just got them printed from Mixim Printing. It's a company, a printer right outside of Chicago. They did great work, and yeah, just sort of listed it on my Gumroad. I'm not trying heavily to promote it at this point, basically because I want more than one book before I start trying to do things like table at events. I've got a release coming Probably within the next month, we're going to be ready to go to a printer that is an educational comic about uh, knowing your rights, about police encounters. That's sort of drawing on my my background as a lawyer and an advocate. That is by the art is by a Philadelphia artist, Akinci A. Brown, who is fantastic. Just been blowing my mind with what he's been coming up with. Uh, and another piece with an Italian artist, Alessandro Saccatelli. This is like a historical fiction taking place in the 16th century about a chimney sweep, a climbing boy, they were called, an Irish orphan who had to climb through chimneys to get them clean. Uh, I, I guess one of the things that I'd like is to have a collection that somehow rounds out my interests in storytelling, which is a little all over the place. Maybe you can tell.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a very long question to a very long answer to a very simple question. Yeah, I released it late April.
awesome. That definitely was not too long ago.
Yeah,
Um, if we're talking about some inspiration that you got within this book, do you have any like influences on it from perhaps past comic book writers?
yeah. One very direct influence is the Selfish Gene, the Extended Phenotype books by Richard Dawkins. I've just been getting into, I'm a layperson, obviously, but I've been into environmental science. Um, Other comic writers, though, that I've really influenced me, S.R. Bissett's Tyrant series. He only completed 4 issues of it, but it's one of the most amazing comics I've ever encountered. Just about, well, it was going to be about the entire life of a Tyrannosaurus Rex from conception through his death, but it ended up being like about him hatching, and I think that's where he stopped. He never got as far as he wanted. Bean World, I know I already mentioned. Um, and not a comic, but The Giving Tree is a major influence. Well, on this book and on me just generally. It's probably my favorite book still.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
yeah.
I love it when people have like these influences on their life, especially when they're like big people that you're just like, oh, I want to be like them. They influenced me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, The Giving Tree, it was my favorite book when I was 4 years old. It's still my favorite book. I think I made a pretty good choice back then. It's this perfect story, and it doesn't tell you what to think about it, and you can just keep coming back to it. This combination of simplicity with incredible depth. It's something that I aspire to. I mean, what I want when I write a book, when I write a story, I want to make something that isn't just going to like pass some time, but something that hopefully at least some readers who really latch to it will want to come back to, will see something different when they do, whether, it's a week later or a decade later. So yeah, The Giving Tree is way up there for me, and as is Tyrant and Bean World. I know none of those are silent comics, which, but they're they're close.
So, what do you hope that readers take away from these comic books that you are writing?
Well, from this book, I hope every reader takes away something different. I mean, I really try hard not to say exactly what the point of this story is. I mean, it's for me, it's generally life affirming. This story was coming out of a time where I was really struggling with my relationship with death and with the people that I've known and loved who've died, and just kind of resenting mortality as a condition we all have. Um, and I guess trying to find a way of being, a way for an animal or a species rather to have evolved so that death is not a bad thing at all. I've had a roundabout sort of journey to reaching that conclusion myself. It's not a conclusion I ever expected to reach. I really did not care for the mortality. I was not happy with it, and I feel like there's a place you can reach for maybe isolated moments in your life where you love life more than your life, and when you take the ego out of it completely, you can be okay with things aren't so horrifying that would normally be. This story, some people find it very or somewhat disturbing. It an animal becoming ripe and wanting to be eaten, or having the next stage of its life sprouting from within its body. That's I get that, but the idea isn't to avoid things that are horrifying, but to find a way of looking at them so they aren't, so they're as beautiful as anything.
I love that.
Oh, Florence is a couple blocks down that way. So yeah, down south a couple blocks. Sorry about that.
It's all good. So maybe we can talk about what the writing process was like from you from start to finish when you were developing your comic book.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, this wasn't the first thing I tried to write, but I had to put bigger things on hold because I wanted to I wanted to write something and finish it and know what that process was like. So I could take that to other projects, maybe bigger than a standalone comic. So I started by mapping it out, just sort of figuring out the main events that had to occur, and then I knew I wanted it to be about 32 pages, which is where it ended up. And once I'd spent a lot of time thinking about it without writing, I just started writing straight through from the beginning. It started out as a silent comic just because, well, I liked the idea of telling the story with pictures, of actually getting good at what makes comics unique. And then it just stayed there. Every time I started thinking that I wanted to add a narration block, I would think that there's probably a more graceful way to convey that. There's a way to do that through images. It just kept rolling along, and then my editing is the most chaotic thing in the world. I just keep rewriting and going back and trying to spend just enough time away from something so I can get that fresh perspective and just keep editing down. Yeah, once I had it where I really, it made sense to me. I'm gonna let this trolley go by. I wanted to. That's when I had to see if it made sense to if anyone else. I had to consult an artist. I found Maxim just looking through um, online portfolios, and I was blown away by his work. But it seemed like a stylistic match. You know, I needed someone who could, bring a reader in with characters that are, you know, there's a bit of a cartoonishness to it. They're cute, but not just be there. He can take you with the story and with the character. So I don't know. To entice someone in is a hard thing. I'd love to. Let me show you. I love the preliminary sketches, which I included these in the book. Let me see. And you can sort of see where we started off with something that was a little bit odd. My main thing was that doesn't look like he could climb a tree, so we needed longer limbs. And then it just ended up saying the last moment was, yeah, I want those eyes farther apart because I like the cartoonishness, but maybe not quite Hanna-Barbera, Some something that's has elements of a nature show to it. That's something I kept going back to, watching some, Planet Earth and things like that. Writing it out, the first draft was very fast. I think I did that in an afternoon. But editing took a long time. Editing, going back and forth until I was pretty happy with it. That took about a month, and then I said, okay, I need to get to an artist. The opening epigraph from Samuel Butler. Wait, there it is just something that I grabbed from. Let me see. Is that legible? I'll just say what it is. A hen is only an end. A hen is only an egg's way of making another egg. It's a quote that Dawkins liked. I think in The Selfish Gene, maybe one of his other books. But that conveying that this animal is sort of an incidental stage of the life cycle of the species, that it serves its purpose. It's just an expression of the genetic information that the egg contains, and perpetuates that and serves its role, and then it's gone. Yeah, so maybe while I was editing, going back to some of those pieces that influenced me, to sort of re-experience that beauty that inspired me in the first place was kind of a part of the process for me.
Did you have to do any research, like any different types of research when you were writing this comic book?
Um, not research exactly. Because it's all entirely fictional. But a lot of sort of plotting things out that are not on the page anywhere. A lot of deep background work that will never be seen. I wanted to figure out more about the world this species is from, and also the selection pressures that caused it to evolve into the form where it is at this stage where we see it. So, figuring out what ancestral species looked like and behaved like, figuring out how an egg evolved to become a tree, uh, figuring out um, that the tree is diploid and the animal is haploid, and I guess I went back to, I did a little research on haplodiploidy and how that works in species on here on Earth, so I could try to create a believable variation of that. That's, I guess, touched on the epilogue a little. Yeah, I'd say just a lot of deep thinking. The only research that I did other than that was the Latin translation. The the title page, well, other than the title itself, the title page and all of the boilerplate. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Text is in Latin, which is just for fun, I guess. It's a callback to very old environmental science books, but also just something that I like that about this being a silent comic is that this is pretty internationally accessible. It's not accessible to a general audience, or at least a general comic book audience for the most part, but really that you don't need to speak English, you don't need to be an American. There are no culturally specific references, and I know Latin is not exactly universal, but it's as close as what we have. Um, yeah, and all that boilerplate stuff doesn't really need to be there anyway. People think it's important to write all rights reserved, but it doesn't actually matter. So yeah, so I had to hire a Latin translator at one point to make sure I wasn't doing stupid things.
And do you think we can talk about your process of developing a character and maybe the backstories?
Yeah. Well, the backstory in this case is. And do you mean like specific to this book or my process in general?
Well, both, but I guess in general, but you could also talk about from the comic book.
Yeah, I mean this is different because there are no human characters. So the background is more in terms of the evolutionary history of the species. But with normal characters, um, I'm a little bit of a like a method writer. I get pretty emotional sometimes when I'm writing. I won't write that a character like cries or gets angry unless at some point in writing it I'm feeling those emotions pretty strongly myself. So if a character is not relatable to me, I know I have a lot more work to do before I can actually write a script. So that can be just sort of sitting and thinking about background, thinking about how I would react in a certain situation, think about how other people I know and understand pretty well would deal with things until I find something that makes sense at a visceral level for me, and I can then I can write. You know, um, one of the scenes that I was writing recently. I'll just talk about it anyway. It's a book that will be released in 10 years if I'm lucky. Um, it is just an ancient person. This is in Corsica, an island off of Italy, in 189 BC, and a woman who is tasting bread for the first time. So a lot of that was research into what were people's diets like, what was bread like back then, was it accessible? People were mostly eating like wheat porridges and bread would be like a brick, and you'd have to be careful because there'd be bits of grindstone in there, and your teeth would break. Being a moment after plenty of other things of you know of traumatic experiences, that being a breaking point is, you know, so I mean, I sat with that scene for I did some research, obviously, but the thing that made that scene work was when I felt like I'd sat with it long enough, that I'd experienced something that um, that made sense to me on an emotional level. Um, and that changed some of the story, retroactively, taking out a scene, uh, or amending a scene where she'd cried earlier. It said, no, this has to be something that was put off, something that, you know, she was really powering through, until this thing that she couldn't have possibly been prepared for. Um, and, I don't know how much of that ends up getting received, but especially on a first read. But it's very important to me that I'm genuinely feeling whatever my characters are feeling. If reading my own writing and getting to that scene doesn't take me to that place emotionally, then it's not, I can't have my characters experience something I'm not. It's dishonest, you know?
Mhm. That makes sense. Alright.
I hope that answers the question. I don't know.
It does. And how have you handled, having writer's block?
Uh, I go for a walk. I just get away from it. It's not usually something that takes a long time for me. I don't usually have writer's block, like I don't know what to write. I have problems where I know what I want to write, but I don't know how to write it yet. And maybe I feel like it might keep changing a little bit. Um, and that long chaotic editing process where it's just like the tide rolling over a pebble over and over again until it smooths out all by itself. And you know, yeah, I take a break. I don't know what else to do. I can't force it. Um, sometimes I'll talk to someone. Usually that's not helpful, but occasionally it is, and I keep doing it anyway. Um, sometimes research helps, or talking to a person, who really knows the craft. As I'm writing a scene recently, just I'm all over the place, but this that 16th century story. This kid who's uh, working briefly for a blacksmith who just is a nail maker. He just specializes in forging nails. Uh, how I couldn't figure out how to write it, basically because I don't know how to forge nails. Uh, so I had to spend a lot of time looking at how that process works, how it might have been different, um, 300-400 years ago, even different from how it's reenacted today. And then ended up talking to someone. Oh, well, I don't remember her name. Out in Albuquerque, though, who's really into that. It's one of the amazing things that you can always find somebody who's really into what it is you want to research. I can't believe how great researching has been, when I'm doing these historical fiction stories. Um, there's someone who just can't believe you want to know all about forging nails, and you want to put that in a book, and they're very happy to help you. So yeah, writer's block is just a combination of giving myself time, uh, coming to writing when I'm in a good state emotionally. And sometimes it's a research helps, talking to people helps, but I'm always gonna get back to a place where I'm ready to write again. Um, because I mean that's why I do this in the first place. I'm certainly not making any money from it, but I I need to get these stories down. It's a compulsion that I can't resist anymore. It's um, so I maybe it's because I put off trying to write these stories for so long that I don't feel like I'm gonna run out of things I want to write just because the backlog is so big.
I definitely feel that. I have some of that same issues myself. Um, what do you think makes your comic book different than others?
This comic, I mean, you know, I know there are comics more like this, but it's a pretty uncommon one. It's pretty unusual to have a 32-page story with no dialogue or narration, no human characters, um, just sort of asking someone to devote all of their attention and imagination to these pictures so they can tell their story. Um, it it asks an awful lot from the reader, and it's not intended for a general comic book audience. I don't think any of my stuff will be, but I've known people with a background in environmental science seem to really get a kick out of it. That makes me happy. Um, I guess the fact that it's all of the text is written in Latin, that's a little weird. Um, and I think Maxim has just an incredibly unique style. I'm just going to keep putting this in front of the screen because, um, yeah, I don't know. I love what he's done with it. I keep getting my mirror images worked in. I I don't know. I guess because I was so sure that this is not a commercial success. It's not the point. I just really wanted it to exist. So I didn't make any compromises that would, unless I thought it would make it a better book for me. So yeah, it's a strange little book. It's in terms of uniqueness, I think it has a lot going for it.
Does seem pretty unique and pretty cool as well. Do you have any tips for inspiring comic book writers?
Uh, yeah, just write and keep writing. It's if you're an artist, that's great. Uh, be a cartoonist and make your art. I I envy cartoonists a lot. I don't draw anything that I show to people. But if you're not an artist or not trying to publish your art and you're just writing scripts like me, you want to you want to find a way to look at your disadvantage as actually being an advantage. Uh, as a musician, I played saxophone. That was my primary instrument, and I still play saxophone. The limitation there is like I can't be in a group that doesn't have saxophone, and most of my favorite music doesn't have saxophone in it. So I always kind of envied uh, composers of like chamber music who are, they get this first stage of, "Ooh, what instruments do I want this to be for? What am I hearing?" And they're not stuck. If you're an artist, that's great. It's one of the best things you can be. But if you're writing and you're writing only for your own art, that's that's what it's going to be. If you're writing and you're writing for any artist out there, just go through portfolios, look for an artist who inspires you, and picture your story with that. Even if you're not going to be able to get that artist, that's how you know you'll have a vision. Um, and then when you're hiring an artist, first expect to spend money. They're not cheap, especially good ones. You shouldn't ask people to work for cheap or for free. It's not a nice thing to do. Um, but don't try to get them to draw your vision. You want to have one, but that's not what's going to end up on the page. Your artist's vision is going to end up on the page. So what you want to do is write something that will inspire them, and give them as much leeway as you can. And that's how I do things. I know it's not how all cartoonists or how all writers do things. Um, you know, I can think of plenty who are. I mean, I've read the script to Watchmen, and it's ridiculously detailed. I would never do that to an artist. I write a note up front. That's something I did steal from him, but just saying like what it is I expect, what it is I want, and what kind of discretion I'm leaving. I want an artist to read 2 pages of a script, that 2 page spread, and understand what's happening on those 2 pages. Really get the characters and the setting and the story, and then get that on the page any way they can, any way that makes sense to them. If they're combining panels or separating them or changing the layout drastically, great. You know, because that's when you look at these comics by some of the best cartoonists out there, you see this complete vision. You see these pages and panels that are wild. You don't know how anyone comes up with this stuff. You're hiring an artist, you're hiring someone who understands this medium better than you ever will, probably. I mean, if they're good, especially. You don't want to get in their way. You want them to make great art. And, you know, it'd be pretty arrogant to think that you know how to do that better than an artist does. So get them to love your story and your characters. You have an audience of one person in the world who matters. And, cultivate that relationship. Work with someone who's a good communicator, a good friend, or someone who could be a good friend. Yeah, that's the best advice I have. Is use, if you're not an artist, use that to your advantage. You can do anything. You can write for any style because you're not just writing for your own. That's an amazing thing if you have the right perspective on it.
Thank you for the advice. And currently, what are your thoughts on the current state of the comic book industry?
The industry, I don't know. I like how it's shifting. They're more towards. There are more and more independent voices. I think that's a great thing. The most exciting stuff that I'm seeing in comics are, well, so over these past couple of years, I've been getting into every Philadelphia cartoonist I can find, and I'm blown away by them. I love uh, Christine Larson's stuff, her sketchbook and orcs, and Caroline Cash, who just moved to Philly recently. Her stuff, her series is amazing. I'm not into the big trends at all. I mean, I like The Walking Dead, but I've not been into any other, copycat zombie stories I've seen since then. Uh, I haven't read anything from the big two that's like, less than 10 or 20 years old. It's just not, it's never been my thing. And I can't, I mean, I can't be a prick and like, act like that stuff's beneath me. It's just not an interest of mine. I guess, my hot take is that I feel like mainstream comics are kind of in arrested development. There's so much more that could be happening, that is happening, but people still hear comic book and they think Superman, zombies, and there's a lot more that isn't either of those things. So I'm mostly optimistic. Not for myself so much. I don't expect to be a commercial success, but I don't know. I'm really looking forward to a few things that are coming out soon. Darcy Van Polgeest's Precious Metal, the prequel to Little Bird, is coming out. The second volume of My Favorite Thing is Monsters is coming out. I've got a reading list that's a mile long, and it grows a lot faster than it shrinks. Yeah, as a reader, I think it's a great time. It's a great time for comics. As someone who's trying to create comics and speaking to anyone else who is trying to get into it, it's tough. You're going to need a good way to make money that probably isn't from selling comics. I mean, if you write the next Walking Dead, great. That's amazing. But if you're looking to hire artists, especially to make comics, you might want to just be writing for a while and working and finding a decent way to make some money so you can scrape by and get things produced. It's not easy. It hasn't been for me.
It's definitely understandable. And for our last question, where can we find your comic book?
Oh, it's on Gumroad. Builtinaday.gumroad.com. And if you're in Philly, you can just reach out to me on social media, and then you don't have to pay shipping. Yeah, that's the digital copies are free. I do want people to just check it out and enjoy it. Print copies are $10 plus shipping wherever you happen to be. And yeah, I hope people enjoy it. It was a real pleasure to make.
It sounded fun. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me today. Had a great time. I was very happy to meet with
Thank
you.
you so much. It's been a real pleasure. I'm not used to answering questions about my work, but it was a real pleasure to give it a shot. Thank you so much.
No problem. And I hope you have a great day, and thank you to all the people who are here live.
All right. Thank you. Take care.